All right, guys, this week we're going to talk about a career and a life lived right here in Idaho. There exists a threat, from anti-hunting groups to politicians trying to give our land away, and we won't stand for it. Those vast western landscapes provide the space for our wildlife to thrive and a place for hunters and anglers to fuel the fire that sparks their soul. In this show, we share our love of hunting, fishing, and conservation. Here, we provide the foundation to meet these threats through passion and the grit of the American outdoorsman. Welcome to the Western Huntsman Podcast. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's episode of the Western Huntsman Podcast. This is Jim Huntsman, your host, coming at you from the Broken Time Studio right here in Clark Fork, Idaho. I have got a return guest for this week. In fact, it is he's an audience favorite from way back when the podcast first started a few years ago. So, welcome, Director Ed Schriever. How you doing?
Good, Jim. Thanks for having me back.
Did you know that you were, I don't know, like one of the first 10 guests I had on this show back when we started out?
I didn't know what number it was, and it was kind of early in your game, but you gotta give the shout out to the Idaho guy, to the hometown guy who's breaking into the market. So that was a fun interview 4 years ago.
That was a fun. I remember you gave my dog a hard time for being chubby, and I wanted to give you an update that he still doesn't miss a meal, and he's still pretty chubby.
Yeah, well, that's good. You're in a good place.
So we decided to do this, or I asked you to come on and do this because you are on the verge of retiring as director from Idaho Fish Game, and I thought it would be a good idea to kind of walk through what your career's been like, and I don't know how I feel about it. I'm not sure. I'm super excited about you retiring, man.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. And 39 years is a long time. A year in the role of director is like living in dog years. So every year in this job is like 4 or 5 or 7 regular years. It's a fun job. I quote that phrase all the time. You do what you love and you won't work a day in your life. And it doesn't really feel like it's been work because my personal values are so aligned with the mission of the agency and all of that stuff. But this job does suck the wind out of you a little bit. And just after 39 years with the agency, I feel like I've pretty much accomplished those things that the commission asked me to do when they hired me on. And being director is kind of like staying with your in-laws, I think, Jim. You want to leave when they wish you would still stay a little bit longer, or you don't want to leave after they wish you'd have been gone, a while ago. So I think the timing's just right, and I can feel like I'm leaving the agency in a good position, and relationship with the commission is really good. There's always going to be issues in fish and wildlife, but I'm feeling pretty good about the timing of my retirement.
When you started with the Idaho Fish Game way back when, did you ever imagine that you would end up being the director of Idaho Fish Game?
Never in a million years, Jim. So great question. I was a young, aspiring guy just out of college, had a young family, and just felt tickled to be hired to be a fish culturist in Idaho in 1984, and had no aspiration. I thought my dream job was going to be a fisheries biologist, and I got to do that, and it was dream job. And then, so I was a biologist and manager, fisheries manager in the Clearwater region for about 19 years. And man, that's the cat's meow, that was the job I always dreamed of as a kid. And then just had the opportunity to kind of jump into executive leadership and went to headquarters and was the chief of fisheries for 8 years and deputy director of operations for a couple. And then this chance, you really never know what this job's like. I don't think anyway until you're in it. But the ability to influence is pretty special. And I made a lot of really good friends among, the stakeholders in fish and wildlife conservation and management. And this has been a very, very cool deal for me.
I just can't imagine the changes. You said 1984. And you started up kind of in the neck of the woods where I'm living now, right? You're up here in the Clark Fork on that Cabinet Gorge Dam hatchery.
Yeah, that was actually my third job. So I started in extreme southeast Idaho at the Gracefish hatchery, and then I went to Hell's Canyon and worked actually in Oregon managing the Idaho Power's hatchery there below Oxbow Dam, and I was there almost a year. And then that Cabinet Gorge hatchery that you're living close to now was built. Washington Water Power, now Avista, built that to raise kokanee for Lake Pend Oreille, and I was selected to manage that facility. It was brand new, had not had a fish raised in it. It was Idaho's first hatchery to be supplied 100% by electric motor driven wells. And so, backup generators and all of that stuff. And it was an exciting ride there for the first year or so until we got some of the bugs ironed out. But yeah, those were great times.
So back in those days, how was what was winter like back then in this area?
Yeah, well, it was cold. There was a lot of snow. There was I think the second year, that would have been 85. I can't remember the year from one to another, but we had a snow plow on a pickup truck, and we'd keep the road, and then we just couldn't keep up with it, and we had no place to go, and actually had to hire a guy with a D8 to come down there and push the snow out of the way so we could keep the road open and keep plowing. So it was definitely winter.
Yeah, that's the problem with just by virtue of how thick the woods are up here and how much it snows, you just always run out of places to push the snow. That's always my problem. Yep. So I'm super curious about kind of your what you've seen for over 39 years. What's been like the biggest change in wildlife management or working for a fish and game agency that has surprised you?
Well, I don't know, Jim, because my perspective has changed so much. If I would have, been my whole career in one job, I would have had this consistency to compare across 39 years. But I've done eight different things, so the perspective is different. I think, though, at the start of my career, we were just coming into a time in Idaho where things like the Forest Practices Act and range management, we were coming out of an era where the Fish and Game Department was in contentious relationships with the timber industry and the livestock industry and any more, right? And so we used to really be struggling with water quality issues and habitat issues And that's just not the case anymore. We're more closely aligned with the timber industry. They've done some really progressive things in the timber industry in the way they build roads and the way they manage the riparian corridor on behalf of water quality and fish habitat and range management. The biggest risk to folks that use the range and wildlife that uses the range isn't the use of the range itself. It's that you're trying to make sure that range stays there and it's not another subdivision. And wildlife needs the same kind of stuff that folks that utilize the range do. They need it to be contiguous, connected, open, all of those things. So I think that's probably one of the bigger things is we're not always fighting with those folks anymore. There's more common ground between what wildlife need and what working landscapes need. And there's actually alliances there where there used to be contention. And I think that's a big deal.
Oh, for sure. I think that is, and actually, you kind of opened my eyes to this in an off way, I guess. You introduced me to somebody named Bill Gaines that I had on the show that talked about the importance of having alliances as outdoorsmen with industries such as, the ag industry or the cattlemen associations or the timber industry, because they're the ones that will go to bat against some of the protectionists, I should call them. And the animal activists and stuff, and so it's been an interesting, I don't know, shift in my philosophy as to how to view that. How long have you been director again?
4 years, almost 4 years. Exactly 4 years.
What would you say is like the biggest challenge since you've been director that you've had to overcome?
Well, I made a comment just last night that the wolf issue has really sucked the life out of me. It's we've made a lot of progress. It was a priority when the commission hired me that we get our arms wrapped around wolf management and the commission's priority to manage for a smaller wolf population and really make some headway in the areas where wolves have a demonstrated conflict with livestock and our ungulate populations, whether they're primarily elk, but in some places moose as well, and just really make some headway. And you're no stranger to this issue, Jim, and it is contentious. It's always legal aspects, legislative aspects. There's some folks that don't think you could ever have enough wolves. There are folks who could never think you could get few enough wolves, and then there's the space in between those two, and so that has been a seminal issue for me in the last 4 years, and the Wolf Depredation Control Board and advancement of hunting seasons and trapping seasons, and making sure folks know that our intent is not to exterminate wolves, but to manage them so they are represented on the landscape and they have the ability to be there, but not to the degree where they're detrimental to the values that we have here in Idaho. And I took upon the use of sportsmen's dollars to build a system where we could estimate the wolf population with some degree of accuracy. And we just completed our 4th annual estimate of the wolf population in all of the occupied country. We just yesterday, the commission just released a draft wolf management plan, the first wolf management plan since the legislature created the Wolf Conservation Plan in 2002. And there's been a lot changed since 2002. The commission's draft plan, so if you need to look at that, we got a 30-day comment period on that. It's the legislatively approved plan in 2002 said if you're above 150, which is the recovery threshold, you don't want, if you go below that number, they're subject to being relisted.
Mm-hmm.
All that plan says is if you're above that number, you got to do everything you can do to reduce the conflicts that wolves have on the landscape. And so that leaves a whole lot of room open for interpretation. If you remember 2 legislative sessions ago when the legislature passed Senate Bill 1211, which provided additional tools to the department, to the commission for management of wolves. And without having a formal description of what our intent is in managing the wolf population, that got hijacked by media who want to sell newspapers and environmental organizations who want to, raise money by well-intentioned people. That got turned into Idaho's plan to reduce 90% of the wolf population.
Yeah,
so,
I saw those headlines.
Yeah, and that's not our intent. But so anyway, we've got a plan on the street, which I just tell you, I'm really happy to have worked this hard over the last 4 years to get sportsmen and the livestock industry, legislators, my commission, to a place where Idaho is willing to describe our intention. All we've said is we want to manage for a smaller wolf population, but we've never really said what that is. Right now, our wolf population is fluctuating around 1,270, right? At the high during the year, it's about 1,600. At the low during the year, it's about 850. And the annual cycle of mortality and birth, this population goes up and it goes down. All populations do that. They're not flatline.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's operating around 1,270. And the plan says our intention is to manage that population to fluctuate around 500. And actually, that is exactly consistent with what the Fish and Wildlife Service wrote in the 2009 delisting rule that Congress stood up in 2010. So I'm happy that Idaho can now tell the world this is our intention. And we think if we can get here, we're going to minimize conflicts between wolves and elk. We're going to minimize conflicts between wolves and livestock. And we're going to continue to have wolves on the landscape, well distributed and sustainable at a number that folks can live with. And by the way, that's the same number the Fish and Wildlife Service thought would be a reasonable number when they wrote a plan to delist them. So,
man, yeah,
I'm glad to be able to cross that threshold during my tenure as director.
I'm glad that we had somebody with this, just the prolific nature in which wolves can reproduce, and I'm just glad we had somebody that looked at this issue and took it as serious as you have, because 500 wolves on the land on throughout Idaho, I think would be an ideal number. I like having wolves on the I had a heck of a time this last elk season calling at wolves in the middle. We called them in the middle of the night, and they're howling back at us, and it's just something about wolves that makes it more authentic being out there. But that said, 1,200 wolves, 1,500 wolves, these numbers and these activists that come back and with their hyperbole about how the Idaho Fish and Game is wanting to eliminate 90% of the population. It's such a and it's not surprising in today's day and age, I suppose, but it's such a, I don't know. It's I'm trying not to go too far with that, but these activists, let me ask you this. When as an agency, because you started before wolves were reintroduced into the state of Idaho, this thing came through, the United States Forest Service, or I don't know if I'm even saying that right. What was the agency's response or feeling in 1995 when there was this reintroduction of wolves? What was your reaction? What was the agency's reaction?
Well, I wasn't in executive leadership positions. I wasn't involved in those.
I know that.
At that time, right? But we, I think, begrudgingly agreed to the federal government's reintroduction plan, partially and mostly because within that plan, and I think well-intentioned by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, most of this reintroduction all of it that took place south of I-90 was to be managed under this part of the Endangered Species Act called 10J, which is an experimental non-essential population, which by nature of 10J is to provide the state with considerable latitude to resolve conflict. And that quickly dissolved. So and it dissolved in the court system. So we were moving into, here's the thing, you're going to have a lot of latitude to manage and resolve conflict and try to keep wolves where the conflict is low, and when they get out of those places, you're going to be able to deal with it. And the environmentalists took that to court, and the court threw that 10J out, and all of a sudden they got the full protection of VSA everywhere, and you can't do anything with them for a decade.
Wow, I didn't know that's how that happened. Okay.
And it went from something that you had great hopes that you were going to have the management flexibility that the feds told you would, and then the court took that away.
Interesting. I didn't realize that. As when we're talking about this wolf issue, and that there's, like you were saying earlier, you have these activists that are on one side that seem to not care that they're putting one species on this like pedestal at the expense of everything else, whether it's another species or the habitat itself or livestock or whatever. It's like they're the only stakeholder in it. And then you have the other spectrum where you've got these folks out there that are like, shoot, shovel, shut up. And no wolves, and these are the wrong wolves. They're not the native. You know that argument, that side of it. And then you've got the folks that are kind of in between. I'm one of those guys that I would have, from a personal standpoint, I'd rather them not. I suppose reintroduced wolves to the state of Idaho, but since they're here, like I said, I kind of like having them out there as long as they're in check. What would you say to, because you come at it from a very scientific place, and you've got these decades of experience in wildlife management as a scientist, I can't remember, you're a fish biologist originally, correct?
Yes.
So you've got this biologist background, and then it's kind of morphed into this thing where you're now in the position where you are the actual director of the Fish and Game Agency here in the state. What if you were like on an airplane and you got stuck next to a wolf activist sitting next to that person, and you were to try to explain to them the realities of wolf populations and how that connects to the other species on the landscape, what would you tell that person?
Well, I don't know. So I've had conversations with all kinds of folks on wolves on all ends of the spectrum, and some folks want to believe what they want to believe for the reasons they want to believe it, and the more you talk to them, the more you just convince them that they're right and everybody else is wrong. But I would say that, I look at this very pragmatically, and I can appreciate, to a degree, somebody's, I would say, romantic view of their concept of ecological balance and the perfect world, and they were here first. We shouldn't foist our human values on top of wildlife, and that's just not a realistic place for us to be in 2023 or 1980. We occupy this landscape as well, and there are places where it's appropriate, and there are places that aren't. And whether it's a wolf or a moose, right? You don't want them walking downtown Post Falls across the street. So there are places that things belong, and there are places that things don't belong, and it's related to people and all safety and all of those things. So there are some folks who might not even live anywhere close to Idaho who have a very romantic view that, wolves are an important part of the ecology, and elk are healthier if you have wolves that eat the sick and the weak, but they don't really consider that mostly they just eat the young, and then they'll eat some of the sick and the weak, and by eating the young they can really limit the prey base population over time. And so we had a conversation yesterday at the commission meeting about, and when I say this, these aren't absolute, right? I can't predict these absolute, but one only needs to look at Yellowstone Park, which is part of the reintroduction of wolves into the Northern Rocky Mountain distinct population segment. That included Yellowstone Park.
Yeah.
And Yellowstone Park did have an overpopulation of elk because you don't hunt in the park. So there is no management of the elk herd in the park. And they wanted to have fewer elk in the park because they were noticing some ecological damage of overgrazing and riparian and whatever, but they weren't willing to manage them with hunting. They recognized they wanted to reestablish a natural predator to establish, again, this view of ecological balance and harmony. So the wolves did that in Yellowstone Park. They reduced the elk population. The elk population could have been managed a different way, but they chose to manage it with predation by wolves.
Yeah.
And the wolf population in Yellowstone Park has undergone the highest percent reduction of wolves anywhere in the Northern Rocky Mountain DPS, because what determines the carrying capacity of wolves in many and most places is the availability of prey. And when they depress the prey population, guess what happens to the predator population?
Yeah, they suffer.
It also goes down. So every one of these folks who have this romantic view that Yellowstone is the place where wolves are abundant, and well, guess what? The density of wolves in Yellowstone Park is lower than the density of wolves some places outside of the park because there isn't the prey base to support what was there anymore. And the concept of, well, just let nature take its course. Well, nature took its course in Yellowstone Park. And so you can look at it now and say there's less elk. And, oh, by the way, there's also fewer wolves.
Mm-hmm.
That's nature, and that's the way it's supposed to be. Well, outside of the park, in Idaho, which isn't a national park, elk have value to society in addition to being food for wolves. And Idaho is simply not willing to let the wolf population grow to however big it will grow, because prey is abundant, only to have the prey go down, and subsequently, to the chagrin of everybody who thinks we'll just have thousands of wolves running around forever, the wolf population will also go down.
Yeah.
And so we're just not willing to go through that cycle of abundance and crash, because elk are important to a lot of people. So you would, if you just let nature take its course, you'd still end up with a lower wolf population somewhere down the line. And you wouldn't have elk that are very important to people as well. So we just want to manage that balance on the front end, not wait for it to happen on the back end, because there's a loss of a lot of other values that are important to people.
Yeah, that it always blows my mind when you hear this argument a lot out of these wolf activists, that they have this. Well, you just want to hunt and trap wolves because you want to hunt elk. You want more elk and deer to hunt. Well, yes, but there's value to that. There's value to that. I don't understand why you think that that's wrong, but at the same time, wolves can be left unchecked and they'll destroy everything. It's like, it doesn't make. And you know what blows my mind is some of these activist groups have like these folks that have PhDs and are former biologists or active biologists, and they put them up as if they've got like this higher level of credibility than somebody who is a biologist for a fish and game agency, or whatever organization, maybe a conservation organization or whatever. But interestingly, that like it doesn't take away from the fact that they have this proclivity to think that wolves should be unchecked and unmanaged, and that there is some fantasy about how wildlife can manage itself in the modern world full of cities, highways, dams, reservoirs, trains, everything else that we have. And it just, I don't know how, like, to, when you're looking in the future, I think that like Idaho is doing it right. And Idaho is, I feel like one of the things when people start getting kind of, which you probably know this a lot better than me, Director, but if you haven't noticed, some people get pretty negative about the Idaho Fish and Game sometimes. Have you noticed that?
Yeah.
And so, interestingly, what I caution people on is the Idaho Fish and Game has a sense of managing wildlife, through hunting, which is something you said when you were on the show last time. Is you said the management system for the Idaho Fish and Game is hunting. And that is very different than maybe some of these other agencies that you see in some of these other states that have different priorities. Because like you said, we value the elk, and we value elk in a different way than maybe somebody values elk in other states that, just has a different perspective and a different value set. And so it's important that people understand that when you're looking at state agencies and how these things are managed, whether we're just talking about wolves or the entirety of all the species on the land, that Idaho actually does do it the right way. It is done through science, and it doesn't mean that I personally agree with every move that the Idaho Fish and Game makes, nor does it mean I disagree with them. It's just it is what it is, and I think that the Idaho Fish and Game does a great job, and it's not like there's you guys ignore the activists, but there is a sense that the Idaho Fish and Game has a much higher read on what the reality is than the hyperbolic crap that is thrown at them from these activist groups. Where I see sometimes in other states, the agencies sometimes react a little, they take them too serious, if that makes sense. I don't know if I'm making any sense here, Director. Maybe I've got cobwebs too today.
No, I get where you're going, Jim, and I want to back up a little bit, and
okay,
you made a comment about activists and their own science, and I'm not really going to throw an ecologist who studies ecology and conservation biology. I don't want to throw that under the bus, because some of that, there's a whole lot of Idaho that is why, I mean, we've got tons of wilderness. There's no roads, right? There's no cities.
Mm-hmm.
And wildlife does have the opportunity to play out in the ways that it would if it was 10,000 years ago, if you wanted to let that happen. It's very wild country,
mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
What this gets to, Jim, in those folks who want to let nature take its course, they're fine with the outcome of that because they have a different values system. They don't value the people's ability to interact with their wildlife and feed their family, and if you're an outfitter, support your business and support the community and all those things. That is not high on their value list. High on their value list is, well, wolves should be allowed to do what wolves do, and if that requires all of the productivity out of an elk population to accomplish that, so be it. People need to take a back seat. That's not really a science conversation. That's a value conversation.
Yeah.
And I understand that, but that is not the prevailing value system in Idaho. My agency, by law, right, the people of this state passed an initiative, the first initiative that created this agency and this commission, and it tells us that we manage wildlife for people. And we have a constitutional amendment in this state that protects the public's right to fish, hunt, and trap. And that constitutional amendment says hunting and fishing and trapping is the primary method in which we use to manage our wildlife population.
Mm-hmm.
Ed Schriever, the director, is not making this up. This is what the people of this state, the initiative that created the Fish and Game Department in 1938, passed by 74% of the vote. The constitutional amendment to protect fishing and hunting and trapping passed by 74% of the vote.
Mm-hmm.
And I get that some people don't agree with that. But this is how civics and government and society works. And we value the many uses of elk, including that they are prey for lions, bears, and wolves. But that needs to be appropriate in the degree of that so that we can continue to provide abundant supplies to the public for fishing, hunting, and trapping. And I'm sorry if you don't like that, but those are the values that we are managing to provide as told by law and the state constitution. You can think that's wrong all you want, and you can turn the narrative however you want in the New York Times and get people to donate money to you, but that ain't the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sorry if that just sounds cold and pragmatic, but that's the way it is.
Let's take a quick time out so I can offer a couple of words from our sponsors. The first one being Eastman's Hunting Journals. Guys, they got the magazine, they got the Mule Deer course, which is an online e-course for you mule deer hunting enthusiasts like me out there. And they got Tag Hub if you're looking to do the research you need to find the right tag to fit your budget and your time frame. Check it all out at eastmans.com. Next is Phelps Game Calls. Guys, Huntsman 10 will get you 10% off at Phelps Game Calls, from elk calls, predator calls, deer calls, turkey calls, all the calls you want this coming season. Spring turkey is just around the corner, so make sure you're checking them out. I like the Black Bat. And last but not least is Hoffman Boots, my boot of choice. One of the most underrated boots that nobody talks about for hunters. Go to hoffmanboots.com and then at checkout use promo code Huntsman10, all caps lock, for 10% off your new favorite pair of hunting boots. And folks, if you're loving the show, if you're loving the podcast, please go to iTunes or Apple Podcasts and write a good review for us. We really appreciate it. It goes a long way to help us with the show and our mission. The Western Huntsman, brought to you by Eastman's Hunting Journals. Check it out. Well, I think that's what's necessary anymore. That is the kind of discussions that we need to be having, and I think we're at that point where it is time to start calling out some of this stuff where it's just like this conjecture around wolves, and no matter what, wolves have to, and like I was saying, sometimes they have the ecologists that go to bat for them. And I don't know if I made that point clear what I was talking about. I don't think that somebody's, whether it's an educational or professional background, will ever overwhelm their proclivity to be an animal activist. I think that the animal activism is what comes priority. And so they get into like this groupthink or whatever, where they want to protect these wolves in any case, under any circumstance, and that's the only solution. And anybody that hunts, traps a wolf is essentially, they demonize us. So when you're looking at this situation with Colorado, do you see any parallels to what happened back in the 90s with Idaho? And would you, if you could offer any advice to the residents of Colorado and the agency in Colorado, what would you tell them as they just kind of start stepping into this whole wolf thing?
Well, I want to be careful as a sitting director not to be telling Colorado what to do, but I would have concern, right? Because part of their proposal includes 10J. And so I would caution them that we started with what we thought were very good intentions on the part of the federal government and the state for the flexibility that would be offered under 10J. With great intentions, that was taken away because folks took that to court and the judges saw it differently. So I would be careful about assuming that 10J will provide you durable management flexibility through some period of time. Mm-hmm. It was very short-lived for us, and we were upside down because we couldn't do anything. We were handcuffed. So I would first caution them that 10J can be a great agreement between the state and the federal government, but there are, there's also the judicial branch of government that gets to weigh in on these things, and there's no guarantee that that's going to be durable. Second, it's, Idaho gets vilified in the wolf management world because we are trying to manage a population that is stable at some place lower than where it currently is. And in order to do that, you have pointed out, Jim, and you're correct. So wolves are big game in Idaho. Mm-hmm. They are the big game species with the highest reproductive rate of anything we manage. And when you're trying to manage stability, mortality has to equal birth. When you want the population to be a little bit smaller, whether it's elk, deer, bears, wolves, squirrels, you have to have a little more mortality than you do recruitment until you get to the level you want, and then you try to balance birth and death. Idaho has been very aggressive in our hunting and trapping framework and structure only to hold even.
Yeah.
And just like you said, there's all kinds, it's a bloodlust. It's kill for the sake of killing. When a population reproduces at 35% a year, you have to take 35% of them, or they continue to grow at 30% a year. And pretty soon you've got this thing that is unmanageable on a landscape that needs it to be managed. And I just have my concerns that the Colorado public is going to be less supportive of the necessary management to maintain a population of wolves at a number. It's going to be very controversial. They are not Idaho. And I would be concerned that it's going to get away from them.
I think you nailed it. I think the demographic in the state of Colorado is vastly different than Idaho. And the way that they involved the public in, going to this vote to, hey, do we want wolves or do we not want wolves? And of course you're going to have, these folks that have no connection to actual natural things in downtown Denver, these flannel wearing hipsters, if you will. Of course they're going to vote to have wolves because for them, it's going to be something cool that they're going to watch on TV or Instagram. It's not something that has a personal connection to them or will have any kind of effect on them. And like to your point that you talked about, how they're going to be able to react to that is going to be way different than what we have here in Idaho, because those voices are going to get really loud if the wolves start getting out of hand, which they will in the state of Colorado, and all of a sudden the wolves are coming into what is that, Rocky Mountain Park or Estes Park or all those areas where people are used to seeing this wildlife. I think that dynamic is going to change completely, and people are not going to react to how the management agency there is going to want to remedy that. So I think you nailed it. I think that's great advice, actually. Hopefully they're listening down in Colorado.
Well, the other interesting thing, Colorado may be a little bit like Oregon and a little bit like Washington. The majority of the population lives on one side of the state, and that's true in Oregon, true in Washington, and that's where the vote, right? It's the number of people who vote. So in Colorado, the people who supported the reintroduction live on the side of the state where the wolves aren't going to be reintroduced.
Yeah.
And the folks that live on the side of the state where the reintroduction is actually going to take place did not support it at all.
Mm-hmm.
But they're going to live with it. They're going to live with the will of the people who are disconnected from it. And that's just this political dynamic that's going to overlay the state's ability to manage. And I guarantee you, wolves in Colorado are going to have the same reproductive rate that wolves do in Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming, and every place they are. And I get that they're describing a population that they want to manage for that they think is going to be compatico to some degree. Well, two things. Wolves aren't going to stay where you put them. And you have to manage the population to keep it at a level. And I just think once those folks who voted for recovery see what that management looks like, they're not going to like it.
Precisely. And
Yeah.
you made a really good point there, that they voted for reintroduction, and essentially by doing so, the folks of Colorado that voted in favor of that also made that decision for Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, because those wolves are not going to stay there. So it's not just the Colorado elk population that's going to suffer, or just the folks in Colorado. Those wolves will be in Utah in no time. In fact, I think there's already some movement from Wyoming wolves into Utah. But anyway, that's bothersome, and that's pretty troublesome. That might be a good way to segue into. You mentioned kind of the political aspect of it. I was curious about getting your reaction on. Was that last year or the year before? I think it was last year. The legislative action that took place here in Idaho, where the commission was kind of bypassed by the state legislators to bring mechanical broadheads and lighted knocks. What's your reaction to that? And what do you, as somebody who's been in wildlife management for as long as you have, is that a problem? Is it not a problem? Like, give me your kind of take on that.
Well, thanks for bringing that up, Jim. But kidding a little bit. So again, let me start, and maybe I have this propensity to maybe give a longer answer to something that you would just want me to say, yeah, I don't like it. But you go back to Title 36 that created the Fish and Game Department, and it was a citizens initiative, and it had overwhelming support when it was written, and it describes things, and it tells all of us that wildlife policy is set by the legislature, and the commission's job is to implement that policy. Right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But the next sentence, the next paragraph says that the commission's job is to ascertain facts surrounding this. They're to manage, basically for sustainability, protect, preserve, perpetuate, and manage. That includes the balance between predators and prey, and making sure that it's available. And then a policy the legislature set up, and it's their prerogative to do that, is the Fish and Game Department is going to be liable for damages to private property from big game. That policy is set by the legislature, and the commission's job is to implement that policy. We don't have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
The legislature said, Fish and Game, you're going to pay for crop damages big game causes. Now, right or wrong, that is policy, and that is the job of the legislature to set that up. And if you don't like that, you need to take that up with the legislature, because that's their job.
Sure.
And you can complain to me all day long that you don't think sportsmen should have to pay for elk eating somebody's hay, but I can't do anything about it, because that policy is appropriately established by the legislature, and our job is to implement that. But the law goes on to say that the actual management of deer or elk or fish, I'm paraphrasing a little bit,
Sure.
it's science-based, It's the department's job to gather that science. It's the department's job to give that to the commission, because the commission is supposed to ascertain facts around the issue. And they're supposed to listen to the public. They're supposed to weigh what the public thinks about it, the societal, right, social science, and the biological science. And that's why there's a commission, and the commission has the sole responsibility and authority to set seasons and bag limits and determine where the opportunity is to have an open season and how many to harvest, and when you need to close a season because there's detrimental impacts. You know, you have a big fire or something. That's the commission's job, because it's impractical. This is what the law says. It's impractical for the legislature to have the necessary time to spend on these issues, to understand them fully enough to be able to implement the management. That's why there's a Fish and Game Commission. So the proclamation that is season setting and bag limits and those things, the legislature put that authority with the commission. Now there's this thing that is in between the two, and that's administrative rule. Administrative rule is more about what defines a muzzle loader, what defines a bow, right? And so the commission sets a archery season. They can set an archery season, but then the definition of what is archery, that is in administrative rule. And the legislature has a role in administrative rule. The commission had this definition of archery, and it did not include, right? You can't have a camera mounted to your bow. And at that time, it did not include the use of lighted nocks or expandable broadheads. And that goes through rulemaking process. The public is involved in it, and we have a rule that people abide by. And some folks support that rule, and some folks don't support that rule. And what we're seeing more is that the folks, and it may be 49%, or it might be 5% of the folks don't like something that's in place. And their frustration with that, their sense of being disenfranchised because they don't have what they want, those folks are going to the legislature to get the rule changed.
Yeah.
So do I like, well, it's kind of the way it works.
Yeah. It was
For
super.
administrative rules. Now, what we're seeing is people starting to go to the legislature because they don't like when the deer season closes. They want a shorter deer season, or they want a moratorium on bow hunting, or something that really is the commission's authority, because those pieces are science-based, and you really need to understand the biology of the animal and what it can and can't support, and not just making these unilateral policy decisions about how long the season should be or how many animals you should harvest. And I think if I was a sportsman, I would be concerned when the legislature crosses that boundary. And I would hope that legislators, before they accept somebody's discontent would understand, would take a little time to review all of the previous work that the commission has done in the establishment of that rule. Because I don't care what rule you have about anything, you can always find somebody that doesn't like it.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
So just because you don't like it, if you can get somebody's attention, we worked really hard with the legislature at that time to tell them, hey, that rule's in place because we did a rulemaking process on it 4 years ago, and here's the result of that. And it's a similar thing. Let me just say the sawtooth tag, right? Mm-hmm. It's a capped zone. We capped the sawtooth zone because we were below objective and we needed to lower the hunting pressure in the sawtooth. So we capped the number of tags. Well, it's recovering quite nicely and it's providing some very high quality elk hunting. And even though it's not yet to the place where it's completely back in objective, it's very popular. Sure. And those limited number of tags are in very high demand. They're currently sold first come, first serve. But because it's recovered, now folks are going, well, God, it's hard to get that tag. I don't like that. I think it should be a controlled hunt where it's fair. Everybody puts in for a chance, and if you draw, you draw, and if you don't, you don't. Some people don't want it to be a controlled hunt because that means you can only put in for it every other year. Some people want it to go back to a general hunt because they think the herd is recovered enough that it doesn't have to be capped anymore. It could be general hunt. So there's 3 legitimate alternatives. We asked the public, hey, which one do you want? Guess what? A third of the people want one alternative. A third of the people want the second alternative. And a third of the people want the third alternative. So no matter what alternative you implement, 2/3 of the people don't like it.
I'm always fascinated with how much more complicated this kind of stuff is than like my simple view of it sometimes. And I think it's always good for people to listen to that because we always kind of get in this almost selfish mode about, well, I want that tag because I think I took a drive through there and I think there's a ton of elk and it should just be a general season, or the next guy. The way you just described it and the way you described the difference between administrative rules and, the one thing you were wrong on is you thought that I thought you were, you thought I wanted just a simple answer, but no, I actually really wanted that more complicated answer because guys like me need to hear that kind of stuff. I think it really helps a lot of people understand the process and the layers of complication and the different voices and perspectives you guys have coming at you, and it's just it's a bigger deal than I think people think it is. In terms of complication.
So I think, you go back to the example you started with. The legislature ran a bill to allow lighted nocks and expandable broadheads. Mm-hmm. And in my opinion, they did that because a few people got their attention and said, the Fish and Game Commission is not listening to us. We've asked for this for 10 years.
Yeah.
We're the only state that doesn't allow lighted nocks. The Fish and Game Commission isn't doing their job. Therefore, we think you need to do it for them. And that can be fair, right? Mm-hmm. But actually, there's a whole bunch of archery hunters who don't agree with that, who did support traditional fixed broadheads and no lighted nocks because they're concerned about the slippery slope of technology in primitive weapon hunting, ultimately meaning that these weapons are going to be more successful and the commission's going to have to reduce opportunity because there's only so many animals out there. So, a minority of people get the attention and say, we're not being heard. We're not being heard, and this is wrong, so we want you to fix it. And that's when I think appropriately those legislators come to us and understand the process that we've been through to get to where we are.
Mm-hmm.
And if they still think it's wrong, then it's their prerogative.
Sure. Yeah. I don't remember how much time I asked you for, but I know I'm running over an hour here, but you got time for a few more questions?
Sure.
What, let's take the wolves out of it for a minute. What would you say you're proudest of that you've achieved as director? Or I guess if it is the wolf issue, whatever.
I'm happy we have been able to get to where we are with wolf management, and we did release the population estimate that was made in the summer of 2022, and it's down 13%. It's the first time we've seen a downward turn in the wolf population since we started really measuring it and understanding what it is. And so I think it's a step toward where we'd like to be. It's a stepwise gradual 13% reduction in the population. It's not a 95%, right?
Yeah.
It's a glide path. The plan says we would like to achieve our goal of fluctuating around 500 within 6 years. That's a glide path. And so I think that's good. One of the other things, Jim, that the commission wanted me to do while I was director was to figure out how to add additional granularity to the distribution of non-resident hunters in general hunts. And we accomplished that. It's in place now since 2020.
Mm-hmm.
To do that, we needed to pass a new rule. We needed to get a licensed vendor that could handle this whole, right? Every unit that wasn't managed by a controlled hunt for deer now has a finite number of tags available for non-residents, even though they're unlimited for residents.
Sure.
There's only so many regular tags, and there's only so many whitetail tags, and when those are gone, there are no more non-residents. And so that's 10 or 15%. So when the commission implemented that, if the percent non-resident in that unit for deer or zone for elk, if it was above 15, they cranked it down to 15. If it was below 15, they set it at 10. And that's made some really meaningful differences in some places. For example, Pioneer A zone elk was 37% non-residents. And the commission implemented a 15% limit. So that's over a 50% reduction in non-resident A-tag hunters in the Pioneer zone. And you can go and see all of that where the distribution was evened out. And that's been a good thing. Now, what we didn't know was going to happen is by implementing these unit by unit limits. It used to just be we had 15,000 deer tags, non-residents could buy them and go wherever they wanted to until the 15,000 was sold.
Yep.
That number's been constant for 30 years. But we were starting to see them hot spotting a little bit, if you will. And so the commission wanted to even that out, and we implemented that, and it's been really meaningful in those places where there was a ton of non-residents. Now, what we didn't anticipate is when you when you have these individual zone or unit limits, that it was going to create this hysteria among non-residents who wanted to hunt in Idaho. Absolute hysteria.
You mean when
I got to get online and get that tag the first minute they go on sale.
Mm-hmm.
So we now have like 67,000 people online trying to buy these limited number of tags, and it's a real challenge for a licensing vendor to the analogy in the Fish and Wildlife world. This is like Ticketmaster and Taylor Swift concert.
Yeah.
The demand is very, very high, and so we're trying to squeeze a fire truck through a garden hose, but it's not affecting residents. Things are going really, really smooth 364 days out of the year, and when our residents are buying products. So that's been a big deal. As I will tell you, it's kind of brought an awareness to the resident hunting public, and unfortunately, it's manifesting in we don't want any non-residents now, and that we had to work really hard in this implementation to make sure that the outfitting industry wasn't harmed, and that they can continue their base of operation. And it's again, Jim, it's one of these issues where folks may not like it, and they're going, what the heck? And they're looking to their legislature to do something different.
Yeah.
So I think if you just pull back for a minute and look at what the commission did, it's exactly what the majority of the resident hunters wanted them to do. And so I am happy that we were able to accomplish that and really kind of even that impact out across the landscape more evenly.
Yeah, I think it was meaningful. You'd said that you'd use the word meaningful, and I think it was as well. That's the kind of stuff, those are the kind of things that make an impact when you're talking about like the quality of a resident hunt. And, they grew up hunting one unit, and every year there's more and more non-residents going into that one particular unit. You guys did something about it, and I don't know. I think it was meaningful. I know that it's an absolute circus. When did those tags go on sale? Like December 1st?
Yep.
Somewhere around there. I know it's kind of a shit show on that end. It's all over social media. Everybody wanting to come to Idaho, and the hysteria behind it. But I imagine that there's got to be some other way that can happen in the future or whatever. But what do you have any, as you're kind of moving out of this role as director, do you have any concerns that whether you felt like were kind of left on the table, or maybe things that you see in the future that could become problematic for Idaho sportsmen?
Well, I don't want to be a fearmonger. I think we all sense this, a bear hunting ban, or seeing what might be happening in other states that where commissioners might be managing more on an emotional basis rather than a science basis. So yeah, I am concerned, but Idaho is really, really strong. It's a constitutional amendment protecting the right to fish, hunt, and trap. For the most part, the legislature is very supportive of fishing and hunting and trapping. I don't think you're going to see bear bait bans, because they understand that these elements, while unpopular to some people, are necessary in some places in order to achieve the management outcomes. So I'm less concerned about that than I would be if I lived someplace else.
Yeah.
But it's always out there, and we think about it. One thing, Jim, that I wanted to push over the finish line, and I didn't get it done in time. So the legislature, Representative Carolyn Troy, got a shooting range bill passed that provides some flexibility and some guidance, and we created a shooting range committee statewide. We've got a $500,000 a year shooting range grant program where we work with more of the local community scale trap club or somebody else that, they need a little help to keep the doors open or to replace some equipment. Shooting sports are important. They provide significant input into the Pittman-Robertson program. We got a pretty nice range up at Farragut. We got a pretty nice range at Blacks Creek. But I want to be able to utilize the flexibility in Representative Troy's shooting range bill, which actually gives what's called continuous appropriation. So that's one of those places, if we have money, we can put it to use. We don't have to go ask for the legislature specifically for the ability to spend money on a shooting range. They've told us, here's a blank checkbook. If you've got money, you can spend it to build a shooting range. And we're using the Citizens Advisory Committee to scope the development of a bigger kind of a destination shooting range, if you will, it's like a theme park. It's like an amusement park. It's got everything from sporting clays to mile long range to cowboy action to just a place to go sight your gun in for hunting season. But it's got all of that stuff.
Oh, that's exciting.
And we're seeing more of those pop up across the country in response to the sport shooting community needing a place to go. Otherwise, they're out shooting up TV sets and couches on the desert, and that's not doing anything good. But so we've got a little bit of PR money pushed into the corner. We're talking with sister agencies at Lands and Parks and Recreation about this conceptual destination shooting range, and we'd like to get that in a community in Idaho that's currently underserved, that doesn't have access to something like that. But it would be the first of, I don't know how many eventually, but I wasn't able to push that across the finish line in my term, but it remains a priority for the commission. It remains a priority for our staff. The Shooting Range Advisory Committee has it high on their radar. So stay tuned. It's coming down the line for those folks who are supportive of the department's operation or at least participation with folks who run shooting ranges, giving people safe places to go have fun.
Yeah, that's I really like that idea because of the two things you mentioned, the PR money that comes out of that, and the alliance we have with shooting sports. Folks that want to go shoot but aren't necessarily hunters are good friends to have. And nothing drives me more crazy than driving down a Forest Service road, and they've got these cleared out areas where people shoot, and it's just a mess. That's kind of stuff that's going to put our public lands in jeopardy in terms of, Forest Service getting tired of having to clean that up and shutting down roads and whatnot. So I love it. I love that idea. What are you going to do now? Once you're retired, what are your plans?
Well, I actually got another job.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, I do.
It's going to cut into your fishing time.
It's cutting into my fishing time. So the governor has appointed me to represent Idaho on the Northwest Power and Conservation Council. Council member Jim Yost, who is the second longest serving council member in the history of the council, retired, and so I'm gonna jump into the vacant spot on the council and most folks don't even know what the council. It was created by Congress in 1980, the Northwest Power Act, and basically the federal hydropower projects in the Columbia Basin, their power is marketed by the Bonneville Power Administration. And of course, it goes into a great big grid where energy is distributed and other folks' energy is distributed on the same grid. Bonneville supplies the majority of electricity to small rural electric cooperatives. And so that's important to Northern Lights and those folks up in your part of the country to have a reliable, affordable source of energy. And then the Power Act also says there's this obligation to mitigate for fish and wildlife impacts caused by these hydro systems. So the council, in loose terms, is to create a power plan that is forward-looking and understands the needs of the people and works to keep that available and affordable, but also pays attention to fish and wildlife. And so in the council's program, there is a fish and wildlife mitigation program that's meant to balance the need and necessity for power with some of the impacts that it has on fish and wildlife. So
Interesting.
Some of that's going to be very familiar to me. I've on the fish and wildlife side, been very involved in those aspects with the council, with our council members, with, up in your part of the country, there's a Northern Idaho Wildlife Mitigation Program that we settled with Bonneville that we're implementing. Southern Idaho, the same. The power side is going to be a little more new to me, and so I'm looking forward to the learning curve. I think it's a very interesting time in the electricity market, and this administration's push for wind and solar and how all of those things come together. So it'll be very interesting, very intriguing for me to serve on the council.
Well, I could foresee some future episodes off of that topic once you've been there a while.
Well, you're a guy always looking ahead, Jim.
I've got to be. Okay, one last question. You've got some young folks that maybe they're finishing up their ecology degree and whatnot, and they're maybe going to be starting with the Idaho Fish Game, a new career in the year 2023. What advice do you give somebody starting out in this career that you've been such a big part of for so long?
Well, you got to bring your passion, and I'll say the same thing I've been saying to people who want to work for Idaho Fish Game since I've been here. You need to understand what our mission is. You need to understand that we manage fish and wildlife for people, that we manage all of the state's wildlife, including the things we don't hunt and fish for. But in those things that we manage that people hunt and fish for, we have a mandate to provide continuous supplies for that. And hunting is conservation. And if you think you're getting a job with the Park Service, you're not. You're getting a job with the State Fish and Wildlife Management Agency that delivers conservation through management. We are not lock it up, preserve it, don't touch it, don't play with it. And so please, if you think you want to work here, understand that, and you will be as happy and fulfilled as I have been during your career.
Pretty good advice. Really good advice. Well, Director Schriever, it's been a long career for you. I appreciate everything that you've done. I really do believe that you've made a positive difference in your time and your tenure as director, as well as the years before you were director, and your commitment to wildlife management and fish and game management, and an agency that I feel, as somebody who's lived in more than just Idaho, I feel strongly that the Idaho Fish and Game actually does listen to the people, even though sometimes it feels like maybe because of one little thing, we do feel like we don't have a voice, and it's just not true. And so I just appreciate that, and a sincere what do you say for retirement? Congratulations, happy retirement. It's funny. I never thought of my own retirement until the last couple of years, and it's like something in my near future. Well, not near future, but close enough that I'm thinking about it. You know what I mean? And so I just it's a fascinating thing, and thank you for everything that you've done, and I think I'm just going to leave it with that. Congratulations on a great career.
Yeah, thanks. Last night at my retirement party, I closed. I'm recently remarried and helping to raise a 13-year-old and a 5-year-old boy, and my son is married now and has a 8-year-old son. So I got an 8-year-old grandson, and my daughter is married and she's got a 4-year-old daughter, and continuing to share my love of the outdoors and fishing and hunting with those kids and my kids. I'm looking forward to that, and I'm happy that I have been able to play a role in some way.
Yeah.
Of keeping Idaho one of the best left places in this country for that stuff.
Absolutely, and I firmly believe it is. That is not me advocating for new residents, by the way, but I firmly do. I firmly do believe it is. So, and it's thanks to people like you.
The issue of growth is a real thing, Jim, and people are starting to recognize that we really have to wrap our heads around managing recreation and all of that, because yesterday's non-residents are tomorrow's residents, and there's only so many square miles, right? And so we do need to be thoughtful about what that looks like and manage it. It's hard to get a place to go to a state park anymore, for crying out loud.
Oh yeah. I gave up on that one.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. What was that?
Don't give up.
No.
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate the time.
No, I appreciate it. Stick on the line for just a minute, and again, thank you and congratulations on retirement.
Thanks.
You made it. That's the end of the episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please make sure you're following us on Instagram at The Western Huntsman, and write us a good review at Apple Podcasts. Thanks, guys. See you next time. Stay Western, and I'll see you on the mountain.